Hello, welcome back. I'm John, and today I'm going to be talking about Honorable Men, My Life in the CIA by William Colby, Director of Central Intelligence, and written with Peter Forbath, who was a foreign correspondent. And I have mixed feelings about this book. On one hand, I feel that it is an extraordinary glimpse into the life of a very interesting man. And on the other hand, I feel that perhaps this was little more than a PR attempt on his part and on the part of the CIA to sort of smooth over some things that had gone on in the public eye and sort of tarnish the reputation of the CIA. And it starts out very strong. He starts with a parachute jump into occupied France and landing in these trees far away from where they were supposed to land. This is in 1945 or maybe 1944. And he talks about how he wound up there, how he wound up parachuting into France as a commando, and how he had come to join the military, how he had wound up in the OSS, a operation he carried out in Norway. He spent several months in occupied Norway running from the Nazis, and later on in France blowing up railroad bridges and things like that, committing acts of subterfuge, and always in complete danger of being captured and killed immediately because the Nazis had absolutely no remorse for commandos. And that was very interesting. It started off very strong, and the first 175 pages of this or so are about his time in the military in the OSS. And after the war ended, he got married, and he went back to practicing law, which is what he had been doing up until the Second World War broke out. And he went into the law offices of Wild Bill Donovan, who had led the OSS through World War II. And around the time of the Korean conflict, he was feeling a little bit restless, a little bit, he was concerned that he was going to be called up back into active duty, and he did not really want to be a soldier again. So instead, he joined up with this thing he had kind of been hearing about from some of his old OSS pals called CIA. And this is about his odyssey through the CIA. And it's a very interesting story. So he joined up, and he thought that he would be sent off to Korea to be where the action was. And instead they sent him to Scandinavia, where he was charged with creating these caches of equipment and resources that would be used by small groups if the Soviets were to invade Scandinavia and to invade Europe in the 50s. And that was pretty interesting, but he says straightforwardly that he really can't talk about it, that he can say that it was there and that it was happening, but he can't talk about who he was talking with or where these caches were or anything like that because they're still classified. After that, he was sent to, I believe, Rome, and he was working there as sort of a liaison with the American ambassador, who at the time was Claire Bouffe-Luce. And what he was doing in Italy and in Rome was he was organizing and paying political opposition to Italian communists. So at the time there was a big battle where, in the wake of the Second World War, the communists wanted to take over Italy basically, and it was a time of upheaval, of a lot of poverty. There was still a lot of damage from the war, so the communists were gaining ground, and William Colby's whole mission in Rome was to give money to opposition parties, opposition to the communists, and pay for posters and things like that, pay for political rallies. That's what he was doing, authorized by the U.S. government. And he succeeded there. And so After that, he was sent to Vietnam, and this was in the wake of the French War. What was it? I believe they called it like the Indochina War or something of that nature. Well, the French had fought the communists in. I'm not going to go into that because, to be honest with you, I don't know a whole lot about what happened between the French Empire and the Vietnamese. So if I go into that, I'll just sound stupid. So we'll just move on and say there had been a government created in South Vietnam run by the Diem brothers. So No Dinh Diem, and I think his brother's name was Nu. And so he worked closely with Nu and, with the Diem brothers, and saw from the inside out how they were running Vietnam, and he was trying to smooth things over and make sure that things went well for the Diem brothers and for the Diem government, which was supported by the Americans, by Eisenhower and by Kennedy. And he became rather close with Nu, and I really hope that is his name. I apologize if it isn't. It's been a couple of weeks since I read this, actually. And he started to see signs that things weren't going very well. And he left Vietnam right before there was a coup, and the Diem brothers, at least No Dinh Diem, the president of Vietnam, was killed in a coup. And after that, he was sent back to Vietnam as an ambassador of sorts. There was a project starting in Vietnam called Chords, and it was ran by Paul Vann, who was the subject of Neil Sheehan's book, A Bright Shining Light, which I have not read. And he was sent there to work with the Strategic Hamlet program under cover of being an ambassador to Vietnam. And so they were working on sort of getting the people in these rural areas to support the South Vietnamese government and giving them weapons and giving them resources, giving them the ability to handle themselves in the the threat of the North Vietnamese, basically. And so after that, he got into something called the Phoenix program. He had gone back to CIA, and the CIA was working together with the South Vietnamese government. And the Phoenix program was basically using reports of North Vietnamese infiltrators into the South, people who were living in these rural villages, people who had infiltrated the South Vietnamese army, that sort of thing, and who were supporting the North Vietnamese, giving them resources, giving them information. And the Phoenix program was going in, usually at night, and capturing these people, or if it came to it, killing them, and interrogating the ones they captured and that sort of thing. And this would come back to haunt Colby and really to haunt the CIA, because it was alleged to be basically a hit squad. Like they were just going into these villages at night and killing people, and basically saying that it was just people in the South Vietnamese government who were getting rid of people that they didn't like and people that they had power struggles with and that sort of thing. And there were reports of that, and Colby acknowledges that, but he says that the reports of that have been vastly overemphasized and exaggerated beyond belief, and that the reality is that he kept a very tight rein on the people involved in the Phoenix program, and he lays out how he had to have at least 3 separate reports from people who didn't know each other or were not involved with each other about every person who was profiled by the Phoenix program, and how he personally laid out the rules against just using this program as a hit squad, basically, which you know, as you read this book, you get into questioning whether or not Colby is telling the truth, and whether or not he was even telling the truth later on in congressional hearings. And I tend to think that Colby was telling the truth and skirting around the truth throughout this book, and that maybe the things that he didn't like, he just refused to look at head on. That if he saw something that he knew was wrong, if he could justify it in his mind, then he could justify it to other people. And I kind of think that that's what he did, not just in the Phoenix program, but later on. So after that, he was sent back to, after the stint there as head of the Saigon station, the head of the Vietnam station in Saigon. He was sent back to the United States, and they asked him to be basically the head financial officer of the CIA. And he didn't really want the job. He thought that it was kind of a dead end. He wanted to be director. It was just something he kind of had his eye on, like he would like to do that. And I kind of think he downplays that ambition as well as just well, it could happen, maybe not. I think he downplayed that. I think he was described as being a very quiet man, someone who played his cards very close. He was a very quiet man. He was not someone who stood out or anything like that, not someone who talked about what was going on in his mind. And so I feel that Colby was a little less virtuous, and it is sort of hard to explain, but I feel that there was a cognitive dissonance between the reality of William Colby and the way that William Colby thought of himself as this sort of Boy Scout of justice. So after a while, he became head of CIA. He was appointed by Richard Nixon, as I said. And around the time of Watergate, there became this, because of the ties to CIA, or the alleged ties to CIA, because of the fact that within the plumbers, the White House plumbers, so these were people who were working under John Ehrlichman. Is his name John? Well, the president had these underlings. One was named Ehrlichman, and Ehrlichman had gathered together this group of people under Howard Hunt, including Gordon Liddy and another man who had been in the CIA. So Howard Hunt had been in the CIA. Later on, he would go on to write spy novels, and he was kind of this extravagant, romantic sort of figure who had come out of the OSS, and I believe, and worked in the CIA, and he was kind of goofy and ridiculous and absurd, but he had wound up somehow becoming the head of the White House plumbers. And they are the ones who went into the Watergate and stole the files and all that, and who were looking at the psychological records of people who were against Richard Nixon as president. And so that had reflected back onto the CIA. Congress had gotten very interested, and the American people had gotten very interested in what was happening in the CIA. And by this time, with Colby as director, he decided to do something that the other people in the CIA and in the intelligence services in general thought was just ludicrous and traitorous, basically, which was to reveal to Congress as much of the truth as he possibly could, including the so-called family jewels, which were all these shady and somewhat illegal activities that the CIA had gotten up to, including anti-Castro measures and the Bay of Pigs, and some of the LSD experiments they had gotten up to. And in something that really bothered me, and so I was actually inspired to read this book by a video I watched by Shan at the channel Secondhand Shan, which was called, I have it written down here because I wanted to mention it, Project Mind Control, which is a book she had reviewed about MKUltra and the crazy, immoral, unethical experiments that MKUltra had gotten up to under, was it DARPA or ARPA, I believe, and then the CIA. And Colby just kind of sweeps all of that under the rug and says, basically, that he was surprised how little the CIA had done as far as stomping on the rights of American citizens, and how few people were harmed, or how few people's liberties were harmed. And he really only laments that one person was negatively affected by that sort of thing. He never names MKUltra, but he talks about how there was a CIA agent who, against his will and without his knowledge, was dosed with a large amount of LSD, which led to a psychotic breakdown and his eventual death at his own hand. And he talks about how awful that was. But everything else they got up to in that vein, Colby ignores outright. And so his credibility with me sort of went down the drain right at that moment, because for him to be such a good guy, supposedly that's what he is called, Colby is the good guy, for him to just say, it's not that bad and we could have got up to worse and you should see what those Soviets have been up to. That's not a good excuse. That is not... It does make me question one thing, which is that I've heard before, which is the CIA will be there tomorrow. The director, they come and go. Directors come and go. And so perhaps William Colby, while thinking that he was told everything, was not told everything, and that he went into this only knowing a part of the story, which is possible. That is entirely possible, that they said, if people were against him, if people were saying that William Colby, he's a traitor to us, he is revealing all our secrets, well, I don't want to be a part of this, so we better put this somewhere else. I don't want him to find this. I don't want him to know about this. He's, cut him out of the loop entirely. I don't want him to know about this. That is an entire possibility, and I would be very surprised if Colby knew everything that was going on. So that is something to think about. Afterwards, he was let go by Gerald Ford, and his successor was George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush was actually someone who Colby wanted to take his place. So this book, towards the end, especially after the beginning where he's talking about being a commando in the OSS, it steadily goes downhill into this corporate bureaucratic lingo and into being a very boring story. And to be honest with you, I was thinking as I was reading it, well, maybe this is on purpose. It has this font, and I know I don't usually talk about font or anything, but this font, and I don't know if that will show up, but it is awful. It hurts my eyes. It is not pleasing to look at. It actually hurts your eyes. And I was thinking maybe that was on purpose also, because maybe we are supposed to be bored and our eyes are supposed to glaze over, and we are not supposed to retain the information in this book or be interested in what's going on in this book. We're just supposed to be going, come on, buddy, get to the end. I wondered if that was on purpose, or if William Colby was just such a boring person caught up in this bureaucracy that he thought that was wildly interesting to other people. I don't know. But I did wonder if it was intentional, and I did come to think of this book towards the end as a PR stunt, as making these bad things look less bad than they actually were, and smoothing them over, and that maybe this was kind of Colby's parting kiss to the agency to which he had devoted his life, this subterfuge perhaps. And that being said, I did enjoy it. It was a very interesting look. It is a strange thing to be able to look inside the mind of someone like William Colby, who who had such a high position that is usually kept completely out of the public eye. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about this, really. It was a wild ride. It was a boring ride at times, but it was very interesting. It took me quite a long time to get through this, but I'm glad that I finally did. And I was glad to put it down also, to be honest. I was ready to move on to other things. But I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope that it is not disjointed, because I feel like it may be. But I want to thank you, as always, for joining me today. And feel free to leave comments or ask questions or anything like that. I'm always open to interactions with you. And I'll see you next time.